We had last week. Some of you had expressed some interest in discussing the topic of young adults walking away from church, leaving church, and there's no doubt that's a struggle that we're dealing with. No doubt something we're facing. I was reminded as I was thinking about this of an ad campaign. It's a lot of years ago now. I was like, I was thinking originally, well, it's not that long ago, but it's a long time ago now. From Oldsmobile car manufacturers, and the campaign, you might remember, was "This is not your father's Oldsmobile." Anybody remember that? Seeing those commercials, and it was a long time ago now, and Oldsmobile is I'm pretty sure this is true, doesn't exist as a car maker anymore. So maybe it didn't work. But what were they getting at when this was the ad campaign, when they were putting this ad campaign out? What were they trying to do?
We realize we have a reputation as picking a car for old people, but changes.
Yeah, they were recognizing that their reputation was as a maker of cars that older people enjoy driving, right? And so they were trying to actively push against that. They were trying to fight that perception that they were a car for old people.
They did the ad again for Cadillac.
They did the same one for Cadillac.
So this is not your daddy's Cadillac.
They've changed a lot.
So most companies recognize that if they're not capturing some of a younger demographic, they've got problems, and they need to push back against those problems. They need to address those problems. Is that a similar problem to what we have in church? Does that kind of thing apply even when we're talking about church? Is that something is that an analogy we can use? Are there problems with that analogy between Oldsmobile and other companies tweaking their products for a younger demographic and the situation the church finds itself? How does it connect? How are they alike? How are they similar? How are they different?
Well, we try to, whenever we study something in the Bible, we try to emphasize that even though it was written a long time ago for a completely different culture, in a different language, that it's still what it teaches is relevant to any time that we can think of. Like when we were discussing Amos, we were always trying to find ways that we could apply what Amos said to modern times, to our times. So I would think that there would be a limited appeal in that way to using that type of advertising strategy, because there are things that we can't change.
Okay.
No matter how old-fashioned they may seem, that's what the Bible tells us the church should be, I think.
Okay. There are things we can't change. With Oldsmobile, I suppose a lot was up in the air, right? We can kind of do what we want now. It's still going to have an internal combustion engine. It's still going to have probably 4 wheels and doors and a roof and and seats and a steering wheel and a transmission, and there's still some things that aren't going to change, obviously, or you don't necessarily have a car anymore. But maybe but yes, one of the things we deal with as the church is the fact that there are some things about our identity, some things that make us the church that don't change.
Patrick,
Yeah,
so you're talking about my second favorite subject here. But one of the sayings we have
you're breaking up a little, Perry.
in the industry is the, oh, sorry, I'm from a distance here.
Yeah.
One of the sayings we have in advertising is one of the worst things possible for and it's not a direct one-to-one correlation, obviously, but one of the worst things possible for a bad product is a good advertising campaign.
Okay.
And I don't want to sit here and say that the church is a bad product. It's not. It's the best product. It's the best product possible. But what we have is a lot of times we're looking, like my clients do, sometimes at the wrong solution,
Yes.
or they're looking for a solution that doesn't solve the problem. If Case IH has a product that doesn't work, and I ran into this actually a couple of months ago. We were working on a campaign. I knew the product didn't work because I know farmers who use it, and they all said this product doesn't work. Case IH wanted to promote the product, and I kept telling my client, this product doesn't work. It doesn't work. You don't want to advertise that element of your product because it isn't what works. In the church, Christ works. The
Right.
message of salvation works. The idea of forgiveness and of a creator who loves us and thinks of us as his children works. The issue all too often is that that's not the product we put out to the world.
It's true. That's very true. I think that's a good analogy. I think that's important to keep in mind here. I kind of was thinking of it this way, but I think, Perry, I'm sort of on the same wavelength as you. One of the things we've got to be asking ourselves as we deal with this reality, and it is a reality, that younger adults are kind of walking away from church. One of the things we got to ask is it a gospel problem or is it something else? Now, if it's a gospel problem and people walk away, well, Jesus addressed that, right? Narrow is the way. Only a few find it. So if it's a gospel problem, then that's something we can't really deal with. If we are communicating the gospel and people are responding by walking away, we probably can't do much about that. I mean, we can try our best to communicate it in a way that is compelling and that tells the story and that tells it in a way people can understand and can relate to. I mean, we can do our best to do it that way, but if we do that and it still doesn't have the effect we want, that's not something we can necessarily deal with. If it's something else, to use advertising terms, perhaps if it's a messaging problem, that's something we can fix, right? That's something we can address. And so we have to sort of determine what exactly the problem that we're dealing with is, to some degree, to whatever degree we can. We have to start considering, all right, what is the issue? Why is it that in every denomination, in every flavor of church you can imagine, young adults are staying away in droves, right? And that we're seeing over and over again across the board, and every leader in every church that I know is dealing with that issue. So what's going on?
And to build off what you said, Patrick, it's a lot of times, a lot of the young people that leave the church that I've talked to have often said I love the message. The message of Christ is great. I'm not surrounded by people who are Christians when I'm in this room. And it was a little jarring one time for somebody to say that to me. Is like, your message is great. I just don't see it living through you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's And that is something I think as we look at the church, especially in America, far too often the church worries about getting the message out instead of living the message out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
We do a really good job of having people on TV preaching the gospel or spreading it on Zoom, or there's preachers that can preach a sermon that is, or, you know, move you to tears. I know a couple, but
Who?
guys back south.
Yeah.
But when we get to the aspect of making sure as a church that we are carrying out the gospel, we fail sometimes. We fail a lot of times, and we fail publicly.
Also, what I hear is the church, this is what I hear. They see the political arena and everything that's going on in our world. They don't hear those things addressed or discussed. So they feel like, okay, so we're in church, but these things are not addressed. No one talks about this. This is what I hear. I have young adults.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot, and I think a lot of this falls into the category, if you have to use categories, and I like that sometimes, falls under the category of a messaging issue. We know what our message is, more or less, though we don't always, but I think generally we know what our message is. The struggle has been the way we've communicated it or have not communicated it, and the inconsistency perhaps that we have demonstrated the process. Now,
Can I jump in right here? This is what
go ahead.
things I've noticed is that where young adults are thriving as far as God and the church are concerned, primarily are in campus ministries.
Yes.
And what I've found with us, adult ministries, we're inflexible. We don't want to take on some of the things that they do in a campus ministry setting because we think you're adults now, let's move past that. The energy that they bring to us. I've been in places where we shut it down, where I've seen leadership just shut that down. That's not how we do things here. And so that's why I'm saying it's an inflexibility to, it's kind of like what we struggle with to sing all kind of songs, right? But this is at a different level. It's being able to come in and have a campus ministry in the church that's not on a campus per se, but that attitude, that closeness, because peer pressure is real, and seeing someone, and I think Perry hit on this, seeing someone like you being faithful to God speaks volumes versus us just preaching it. And if we're not flexible enough to allow some of the things that happen on a campus ministry, the zeal, the zest, the singing. I do a lot of my devotionals listening to Hillsong. I put it on and I'm blown away at those young, it's not the young people, they're just praising God and having a wonderful time at it. And of course, you guys know I've worked at a lot of Christian universities, and I think that's what's missing. We're not flexible enough, and we're threatened by it. And I say that because when I was in campus ministry and went into a church, the church was frightened and scared about this shift or this adding. I think inclusion is the better word, because we weren't trying to change what traditionally how they worship, but we needed to worship a different way. And that's with the zeal and enthusiasm and the different things going on. And so the churches that do that and allow that, and there are churches, I'll push back a little bit here, there are churches that are very vibrant with single adults. I know a few of them. And it's because they are allowing praise, worship, whatever you want to call it, to be done in a way that speaks to them. It's a flexibility. And that's the one thing I see. Sure, there's so many ways
absolutely. And one of the things I wanted to do tonight, I wanted to start doing tonight, is I wanted to walk through this survey that Lifeway did a few years ago. It's 4 years old now, I think, 2017. But they went through and they said to young adults who had been regular attendees at church throughout high school and who had been through the 18 to 22 years and now were 23 to 40, they asked them a lot of questions. And I want to walk through that a little bit. And it's a little bit tedious, perhaps, but I think there's some interesting stuff in there. And I hope you were able to take a look at some of that before we got together tonight. If you aren't, maybe you'll want to after we're done. First, I want to suggest a couple of books to you that I think are very helpful and have been helpful to me. One is You Lost Me. That's the name of the book, You Lost Me. Josh is going to share a couple of screenshots for you. One of the books is called You Lost Me, and it's by David Kinnaman. And do we not have that, Josh? Yeah. Okay. By David Kinnaman, who has worked with Barna Research Group. And it's called You Lost Me, Why Young Christians Are Leaving Church and Rethinking Faith. And there's some really interesting stuff in there that I think you'll find interesting, and that I'm going to have some things to say about as we go. The second book is called Unchristian, also by David Kinnaman. And again, another sort of exploration of this phenomenon. What exactly is happening and why, and what do churches do about it? One of the things we have to get used to as we talk about this stuff is that we're going to have to be willing to hear some things that maybe we don't want to hear, and we have to hear those things for what they are. They are not infallible opinions, but they are impressions, and they are opinions that seem to, across the board, have developed among young adults about church. Very generic term, church. And so, if we want to talk about this constructively, we're going to have to hear some of that. And Colette, what you said is perhaps a good introduction for us to recognize there are some things we could do better to help address this issue. And they are things that do not compromise the gospel, and there are things that do not that the only downside to them is that maybe it's not what we're used to. By we, I mean us older people. And we might need to be flexible about that. And we're going to talk about that quite a bit some, but first let me just walk through this. Let's walk through this survey a little bit. So Josh, if you pop that Lifeway survey up. Now, this survey was taken, it was given to 2002 adults who are 23 to 40 years, 23 to 30 years old. Josh, you can go to the next page if you want to. They're 23 to 30 years old, and they attended church regularly, at least twice a month is how they define regularly, for at least a year while they were teenagers. So this is a group of 23 to 30-year-olds who, when they were teenagers, attended church at least twice a month for at least a year. And they started asking questions. If you go to page 4, Josh, one of the questions, did you stop attending church regularly for at least a year between the ages of 18 and 22? So they took these people and said, hey, when you were 18 to 22, did you stop attending church regularly for at least a year during that time frame? And you see the results of that. 66% stopped. That's striking. 66% of these young adults who had grown up to some degree or the other going to church, between the ages of 18 and 22, they stopped for at least a year. Stopped going entirely. By the way, please chime in if you have comments or thoughts or questions as we go here.
That's actually fairly common. I mean, as this says, but that doesn't surprise me because those pages in particular correspond to going away to school.
And we're going to talk some about that too. Yes, so Matt points out those ages correspond to going away to school. One of the questions I have, and that's one of the reasons it's given very often. Well, I moved away, and that's why I stopped going to church. The question would be, well, did you stop getting your hair cut? Did you stop going out to restaurants? Did you stop going? No, you found new places to do that. So why did you stop? Why was church not a priority? Finding a new church somewhere, why was that not a priority? I think that's a reasonable question too. When dealing with that.
Yeah, that I think is an important factor in all of this. What are the associations that people find with church? That can be one to break. It's a particular group of people in my hometown that I grew up with. That's the church.
Sure.
It's not, but if that's your idea of church, then it's going to be powerfully affected by all the imperfections that those particular people have.
And there's a lot of reasons why people might choose not to pursue, or as one of the things we're going to see, they might not choose it. It might just kind of happen. Because honestly, the easiest thing in the world is to just sort of let it happen. Let it stop. Page 5, Josh.
It's unfortunate that the question is attending church. That is the way that we have to judge what's a person's relationship with Christ.
Well, I'd say this. The survey is not attempting to judge a person's relationship with Christ. They're attempting to judge a person's relationship with the church, because that's what we're dealing with. That's the question we're asking.
You can't really statistically quantify someone's relationship with Christ. You can say how many times they went to church.
So what they're asking is, what's the relationship with the church? That's the question we have on the table. And obviously, I believe those things affect one another, but
Right, that's the issue behind this. Nobody would be bothering with this survey if they didn't think that that was symptomatic of a larger problem. People aren't attending church, and so their connections to God in general is broken.
well, we would think so, yes. I mean, or what are we doing here? So the next page 5, when you add up the figures, this is a question about this question is, which best describes your current church attendance? So asking these 23 to 30-year-olds, do you regularly attend church? And by the time they're 23 to 40, 23 to 30, almost half do not attend a church at all, or only a few times a year. Those first two categories. Don't currently attend a few times a year. That's 47% right there. So these folks who did attend, by the time they're in that 23 to 30 age range, almost half of them attend hardly at all, or not at all.
What's interesting though, the largest single group is
Once a week or more, yes, and that's the other interesting thing here. While the fact is that about 2/3 seem to be going away, there is a third or thereabouts that is once a week or more, or 3 times a month. I mean, 3 times a month is pretty often, right? by their standards, 3 times a month is pretty often. So you're still looking at a sizable group that are still attending, or that respond that they are. But you have a larger group that is not, or not much. Okay, next page. Another page from there. This is just interesting because respondents could choose ages when they were attending regularly, and they could choose all that apply. So if they were attending when they were under 13 and 14, they could pick each of those ages. And just go through here. I want a bird's eye view of this one, Josh. So 13 through 17, look at the numbers, look at the percentages. Now the next page. And now you see the percentages going down as we get into 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, it's stable. And then look at what happens after 22. It stabilizes because some habits are formed, I suggest to you. These new adults have developed some habits about church attendance, so that from 70% or so in the earlier ages, we're down to in the 30s, the low to mid 30s, in ages 23 through 30 that attend regularly. So you see the decline, you see how that happens, and you see how it stabilizes out at that point. Now, page 12, Josh, skip over to page 12. This is reason that this is where the section that starts talking about reasons that young adults stop attending church. There are 4 categories, and you could choose all the categories that apply. Life changes or situations is category 1. Church pastor related reasons is category 2. Religious, ethical, or political beliefs, category 3. And student youth ministry reasons, category 4. One of the things we were talking about earlier, look at what by far overwhelmingly the most people, the most respondents give as a reason. Life changes and situations. Overwhelmingly. 96% say we don't attend because of the life changes. We'll talk more specifically about what those life changes are.
But you could select, respondent could select any.
They can select from, they do, they select from any that apply. But the most respondents selected life changes and situations, selected from that category.
It seems to me like that's something you would throw in. I had issues with my pastor, it conflicts with my political beliefs. Oh, and also.
That's very possible. One of the things that I think is one of the things that comes up here a lot is, as far as I'm concerned with these statistics, is, I mean, what more could you say about some of these things? And I suspect as we go through, you'll see some of that. Go ahead and skip to the next page. So now we're into the specific reasons within these 4 categories. And this is just across all the categories, the top, I believe it's 9 reasons church dropouts say they stopped attending church. Number 1, I moved to college and stopped attending church. Number 2, church members seemed judgmental or hypocritical. Number 3, I didn't feel connected to people at my church. I disagreed with the church's stance on political or social issues. My work responsibilities prevented me from attending. I never connected with students in the student ministry. I simply wanted a break from church. I was only going to church to please others, or I moved too far away from the church to continue attending. Comments, thoughts on these as these sort of lay out for us?
Hey, Patrick, to me, it just seems like people that are convicted at an early age probably are those that answered in that 27% category that keep going. If they don't feel like, and I think maybe we have not set the right expectation, because once people get older and they decide that it's not worth them going, which is basically what these people are saying, they don't see the benefit. Maybe we set the expectation that God answers every prayer, they're just getting answered and there they go. Or that we're supposed to be perfect and we're not, and churches are not a hospital, which it is for people who are healing. Those are things that I think resonate with people when they start getting that age of life, when they think they got everything and they don't really see a benefit. But when they hit a problem, invariably they come back if they find that it's been represented well and that we represent what they think the church should be to them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think some of the statistics here, the data here will bear that out. Some of them may not. And actually, there's a section in this study that has to do with those who didn't leave, and why didn't they leave? And there's some interesting results there as well, I think.
What's interesting.
I wonder if the people that moved away, if they felt connected, or if they felt like they were getting something out of it in those early ages, would they have looked for a campus ministry or something close by?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid question. And that's why I'm a little dissatisfied with an answer like, I moved to college and stopped attending church. Well, I mean, when you move away, things always change, right? So why, and that's the reason, that's the question. Why did you not, what were the reasons that you did not prioritize finding a church near you? If you did not. And so I mean, I think a lot of these answers, to me, raise other questions that come back to things like you're talking about, David.
When I saw that top, I moved to college and stopped attending church. What I thought of is perhaps they haven't made their parents' faith their own.
Yes.
And that's really what that is. So maybe there's a spiritual immaturity, or, they just haven't gotten there. They've only been going because they're going with their parents and just kind of walking in their footsteps.
I think that's a really reasonable hypothesis. And I don't think there's any data in this study that addresses that specifically, but I thought of that too. That's an interesting question to deal with, right? I found it at Northwest with a couple of families over my years here, where like a parent dies in their 80s, and the children who are in their 60s stop coming then. I mean, that's a striking thing to me, that they've gone into their 60s, the parent dies, is no longer there, and they stop attending entirely. I mean, boy, that's an interesting.
There for the parents.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting phenomenon, isn't it? That's an interesting, and I think addresses what Nicole's talking about. You can kick that move down the road a long way, until you're getting up there in years too, and still not make that faith your faith. And one of the questions that some of this has raised for me: to what degree in the church are we interested in cloning ourselves spiritually? And to what degree are we interested in helping people come to faith, their own faith in Jesus? I suspect, and maybe addressing what Colette's talking about, I suspect that sometimes there's an impulse among us that not only do we want our children following Jesus, we want them to do it kind of like we did. and that may be kind of an unrealistic expectation.
That's behind all of this. I
Yeah.
think people leaving church, they think, well, I want to be exactly like those people, and I don't want to be like those people.
Yeah.
I mean, in a very general sense, yes, you need to be like all the Christians before you, but what that looks like in terms of application varies wildly.
Sure.
That's why the scriptures don't go into specific application.
Yeah.
They're
One of the
always wrong and universally condemned, but those things are not, and it's all situational. And the Bible intentionally doesn't try to prescribe every waking moment.
Perry, go ahead. What was your comment? Thank you, Matt. Yeah, I mean, Perry, what was your comment?
Oh, I was just gonna say, one, this strikes really close to home because I was one of those people who attended 3 times a week until I left for U of I, and then I didn't attend. I probably could count the number of times I attended yearly on one hand until I met Kathy. And one of the things that always struck to me is I sat and thought about it one time when we were talking about this in a previous conversation, is that I was introduced to the church that I grew up in. I was brought in by my family, and therefore I was easily accepted because I was already a part of that family. I was born into that family. When I went to U of I, for the first couple months, I tried to attend churches. There were some issues, it was a 2-mile walk to get to my car, and then it was a 10-mile drive off campus to find the nearest Restoration Movement church. But it was, when I got there and would get to a church, there'd be 300 people in the building, and hi, how are you? Oh, are you a student? That's nice. We have a student group over here. And you can join, you can go sit with them during college, and they would immediately push me into with the student group, and they would immediately say, oh, the student, and I would be like, I wanted to meet the people of the church, not just the people my age. It was, I missed that when I was growing up in the church. I sat most Sundays with this 70-year-old guy in the back pew and his buddy. And that was my church, in my church family. And that was, to me, the church family was everybody. And every time I tried to start at a new church in Champaign, it was immediately, oh, here, go sit with the kids.
Yeah.
And I've always struggled with, as a church, that we immediately try to say, oh, you're young adults. You must want to spend all of your time with other young adults.
Right.
And it's not that, I don't think for the vast majority of young adults that attend church, yes, it's important that other young adults are there, don't get me wrong. But it's that idea that, oh, I'd like to, one of my favorite memories about coming to Northwest was the first time sitting and having a conversation with Alan afterwards, and having a conversation with you, and having that group that was a range of ages, and I didn't feel like, oh, everyone's going to expect me to be a part of the youth, the young adult group. I can be a part of the church as a whole. And maybe that's one of the things that this isn't taking into account, is that a lot of times when these young adults, these college age kids, try to attend a new church, they're immediately sent to the kids' table.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, I don't feel connected. I didn't feel connected. I wasn't able to meet people. I wasn't able to have the community that I was looking for. I mean, one of the things that is easily demonstrable, you look at work environments, you look at, across the board, young adults are looking for community. They're looking for connection. They're looking for the ability to have those human connections. And that's one of the things they want in the church, and are looking for it in church. And if they don't see it, it's a struggle for them to continue, as it would be for most of us. I'm not sure that's only young adults who are dealing with that. I think all of us are dealing with that. And it is difficult. Imagine, an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old in a new city, a new place, walking into a new church and trying to make those connections. That's a scary thought. That's a scary possibility.
Church surveys have shown if you don't make a friend in the church, you're going to leave.
Yeah.
Just the way it is. Yeah. You got to make some friends.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
Go ahead.
Well, what Perry said made me think about a couple pages ago. Hey, I'm gonna get for life to go back.
You go back.
Yeah. Student youth ministry reasons, it was not as selected as the others. And I feel like a lot of churches, their strategy for keeping young adults is just throw a ton of youth ministry programs at.
Yeah.
And I think these statistics suggest that that's really not helping that much. And there are other issues that need to be addressed here, instead of just, we'll throw you together with a bunch of other people your age and go forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting point. So a lot of these kids who are teenagers, you're in youth groups, right? And it's fun, and there's good friends, and then you're off to college and there's no youth group. And maybe you haven't been taught and led in how you can be a part of a church without that youth group, those youth group activities. You are not equipped for that move, perhaps. And I suspect that you know, in trying sometimes, and I think rightly so, in trying to minister to the specific needs of teenagers, we sometimes maybe create people who are kind of dependent on those ministries, on those groups, on the leader, on the friends in the group. And then when that's gone, it's hard to connect with a new church and a new group of people.
It's kind of a problem with American life in general, maybe past even America. Clear about this age, kind of go through the same life experiences as everybody else.
Yeah.
You're supposed to go to school at a certain age, and you rise through the ranks and learn the same general things, and sort of get yourself set up for some sort of a career, and then after that, there's no roadmap anymore.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Nobody really tells you what to do after that. You're supposed to sort of figure that out for yourself somehow. Because of that, it's a larger issue than just church.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a really good point. We growing up is growing into adulthood in Western culture, not just American, Western culture in particular, is difficult because you don't really, the expectations keep moving, right? It's a moving target. Yeah. When am I an adult? Exactly. Well, it depends on what you mean. and so you're dealing with all of that while at the same time trying to find your place in a new church or in your old church even. And it can be a struggle, and a lot of people just don't do it.
For example, there seems to be a large expectation that people will sort of move away from their families and establish themselves somewhere else. It's not a requirement.
No, of course not. And in fact, wouldn't have been assumed a couple of generations ago, right?
Is it any wonder that people might apply that to church? I go to church while I'm there, and then I move away and I do something else. Because church is localized in the minds of those people. That's one of the fundamental problems in what's going on in people's heads that needs to be addressed somehow, either by the church itself or the factors.
Let's skip on again. Please just jump out. I can't see everybody right now, so if you're like timidly raising a hand, I can't see you. So just shout out what you want to say if you want. Go on to I guess Josh, page 14, if you would. If I'm right, this is where it starts with the. This is breaking it down into in these four categories: life changes and church and pastor related, and student and youth ministry related, and religious and ethical political beliefs related. These are reasons within these categories, from greatest to least. We've talked about some of these already. I moved to college, work responsibilities. I simply wanted to break from church, move far away. It was now my choice instead of my parents. That's an interesting and honest reason, right? If your parents were making you go and now you have the choice not to and you don't want to, hey, you don't have to. I became too busy, though I still wanted to attend. That's an interesting one. Next page, please, Josh. School responsibilities. I chose to spend more time with friends outside the church. A couple of further down, I lost touch with my church-going friends. So that's a couple of dynamics happening, right? You've got the friends in your youth group and the new friends that you're making wherever you are, maybe aren't church attenders or aren't going either. I wanted to make life decisions that were not accepted by the church. This and a couple of others like them, I wonder if it's maybe a little underrepresented here. Anecdotally, I know lots of people who, as young adults, slipped away from church after they got into a romantic and, I assume, sexual relationship. And they kind of, when they got into that relationship, they stopped going to church. I suspect that there's something about sexuality as young adults, especially in a culture where we're pushing marriage on down the road. I mean, that's a difficult proposition. And a lot of young adults, I think, instead of living with the tension in their between what they might be doing and what their faith says, they just abandon one or the other. What they usually abandon is the church. And I don't think it has to be that way. I think, in the church, we can say to people who are struggling with real issues, we love you and we want to be your family and we want to help you in this. And we want to be there for you as you make these decisions and move in these directions in your life.
Especially since it becomes pretty arbitrary.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of more mature Christians who either rightfully or not rightfully, that these younger Christians assume, they would have a problem with my lifestyle, had lifestyles like that when they were that age.
Sure.
And certainly are still struggling with sins, whether they're the same ones or different ones. And that ties into the hypocrisy that a lot of younger people are experiencing.
One of the things I wanted to say about the hypocrisy issue, and I'm glad you brought that up, I think it connects with what we're talking about here. One of the things I wanted to say is I'm still not totally sure how much hypocrisy young adults are seeing in the church and how much they think they're supposed to be seeing in the church because of the way media represents the church. You know what I'm saying? I think sometimes there's this assumption that there's hypocrisy when what is really being reflected is sort of the way the church has been portrayed in some, almost parodies of itself and entertainment media.
The proof of that is what you were just saying, that usually when people get involved in something they know is incompatible with what they've been taught in the church as part of their faith, they don't continue going to church anyway and flaunting it. They leave.
I think I think that what I think I have an issue with the fact that we really don't teach. We don't teach what the sins are in a way that it's an appetite for the youth or young adults. And so it's an assumption that if I'm doing these things, A, B, C, D, F, because we haven't had thorough teaching about them, other than if they've been somewhere and they're screaming about it and telling them they're going to hell, that's another whole
Right.
worms. But to truly teach to a converted heart what sins are, it's kind of hard to walk away from it, I think. But that's based on my experience and the people and the lifestyle that I've had around other Christian young adults. But I think a lot of times the people, when I've sat down and studied the Bible with them, young adults, they have an assumption of what sins are, but no one has ever discussed them and made it practical with them about their lives and how that affects the cross and what that means for them in their conversion. That conversation, I would almost say 99% of the young adults I've studied scriptures with, that just doesn't happen. It's something they heard in Sunday school when they were little. Sex, oh, okay, but never really making it a practical, real thing.
Yeah.
And then it's hard for them to make a decision when they are faced with those challenges. I remember years ago, I think it was with Van, and we did that whole rap thing, remember? It was kind of neat because rap music was just really, really big, and a discussion about it in the church was something that Van thought for our teens that wasn't happening. And so they need to understand and listening and how to align that with their lives, but yet still be Christians, how to enjoy what their other peers are doing. Not the sin part of it, but to enjoy it and not feel like taboo. I can't go to church because I like Kanye West or something crazy like that. So I think a lot of that is missing and people don't know how to grapple with it. Or I remember even teaching Sunday school classes here at Northwest. The conversations we would have with these single adults were amazing because they'd never experienced having those conversations. And May's daughters, other young ladies, they would bring up topics and say, we want to talk about these things. And so that was really, really helpful. And yet they were raised in the church, but somehow the community of the church or the church, they hadn't heard it and hadn't been taught that it touched them where they lived. So I just think a lot of that is missing. It's a lot of assumption of what sins are, and so then you paint your own picture and you'd rather not go because I feel guilty, and yet we don't know what we're feeling guilty about.
Yeah, Colette, I agree with you on that, especially with two girls that are in college right now and watching them. But addressing the sin and having that conversation. I think the other thing that's different is what is the response and what is the Christian's response to sin, and how do we deal with that? And, it's different for them. When I was in high school, I knew one person that was a homosexual, and they were out on a limb and crazy. They're surrounded by that. It's normalized, it's naturalized, it's to be even revered. You can't say anything about it in school or what have you. And so the ability to talk about that, and not just the condemning talk, but what is our Christian response to those challenges? And I think it's the same thing that May was talking about. I think this young generation has a different mindset than me. They want to tackle the world. They want to solve the problems of the world.
I want to see love.
And they want to see love in doing that. But I also think, in my experience in this group, and I was, one of the deacons over a very large youth group, and I'm on the board at Freed Hardeman, so I spend a lot of time dealing with college students in a Christian environment that's there. Is, if I think about the history of the church and things that have happened, if I think about my grandparents' generation, that was the evangelism phase. You were having campaigns and going out, and everything was about evangelism. If I think about kind of the generation that we are in and have been in, I think the church has been very internally focused, developing relationships within the church, nurturing the church, et cetera, et cetera. And I think in many ways, we've lost some of that outward expression. But one of the ways that I've seen to get young people involved is go do stuff. Get out in the community.
Yeah.
Solve problems. What we're doing with the food pantry. Go into areas that need to be. You want to get kids involved? They want to do that. They want to see that they're doing something, in my experience with that. And I think those are things they want to talk about, those issues. That my girls at Freed, they did a special session at the church that they go to. They didn't live stream them, and they had real conversations for a series of lessons about all of these topics. And I can tell you it was transformative to them. So my daughter, who's a senior, in every sermon she's heard all those years, those are the ones that she keeps talking about that meant so much.
Yeah, yeah.
Amen.
One of the things that strikes me as you guys are talking, page 18, Josh, one of the reasons given 12% of the time, I didn't feel involved in meaningful work in the church. I think that's kind of interesting. So if that's true, some of these young adults trying to find their place aren't meaningful to do. And I think meaningful is an operative word here. I think sometimes in the church we have tended, I know I've been guilty of this, because when somebody wants to do something, I want to know I can count on them, right? So I think sometimes we've been a little bit guilty of sort of saying, well, let's have you on this like probation period where we kind of see if we can trust you before we start giving you stuff to do. And I think that's a mistake. I mean, I start giving them stuff to do. Start handing young adults things to do, and say, and meaningful things. Run with this. Do what you. And you know what? They might mess up. Well, if they mess up, we'll solve that when we have to. We'll fix that when we need to. But I think that's one of the issues that that some of our young adults, I think, are struggling to find their place because we're not letting them find their place.
I think like some of the discussions that I've had with Kellyanne, who works for Planned Parenthood, like she says, in the church we're taught one thing, and I'm here doing fundraisers for people that may need an abortion. She said, those aren't things that, I don't know how to handle that from being in the church. But in my political arena, how she feels about it is, I should be doing everything to raise funds for these people. I mean, someone needs an abortion. I have to do the fundraising for this. I have to get the money for Planned Parenthood. I stand with them on so many things, the political part of it. So it's very hard for them. And I say to her all the time, I understand. I don't know what to tell you because where you stand, how you feel about this and how I feel about it. It's just,
well, it is
very hard.
That's one of the things that I think we have to get straight. And one of the things we're going to start really talking about next week. We need to be looking at young adults who are struggling with these issues with grace and with compassion and with love and with some trust.
Yeah.
What you just said, May, I don't really know what to tell you, Kellyanne.
And I don't, but what I tell her is the fact that this is on your mind, at least you have
Yes.
a place to start from.
Yes.
And I know you're working towards something.
And that's
Or
I think
it wouldn't bother you if you wouldn't talk to me about it if it wasn't something weighing on you.
I think
Because I mean, like she said, I'm doing fundraising because I'm getting money. She worked with Elizabeth Warren and I forget the other person, but on this, whatever they just got passed with Planned Parenthood. I'm like,
and there are some parents and there are some Christian parents and some churches where people would say, you know
that's
what?
wrong.
You if you do that, you're on your own. You're gonna have to keep that to yourself. We're not gonna, and of course they're gonna clam up and they're gonna pull away. And sometimes we've got to live with our discomfort enough to help people who are going through these things.
Because it is a hard place to be.
It is. It's a tough
I mean,
place.
I see both sides of the coin.
We
But at the same time, I feel a certain way, but I can't inflict on her just because I feel this way. I have to hear it and have to weigh the fact that, it is a two-sided coin.
growing up in our world, growing to adulthood in our world is not getting any easier.
No.
And I think it's even harder now than it was just a few years ago when I was a 20-something. Just a couple. I think it's even harder now than it
I
was.
think it's so hard when you work in, like Taylor works in corporate America. Very hard. Ashley, corporate America. These are hard roles that they're in. And they're faced with some conflicts that it's hard.
So next week, we are going to start kind of addressing directly this thing that you brought up, that we need to be feeling that our place is to help our young adults feel these things out. And that we can, how can we become a place, a group, a community where that can be done safely and without a sense that, I don't know how people are going to react. I don't know how people are going to react when I tell them this. I don't know how people are going to react when I admit that I'm dealing.
There's no permanent solution to something like that, because this is a cyclical thing. Every generation thinks that they're going through new and uncharted, that people have never navigated before. The preceding generation will say what you just said, oh, it's harder for them to grow up now than it was for me. I think that happens with every generation, and we need to realize that perhaps the issues are the same, maybe the applications change, and we need to help people through that, but that's one of the more powerful things we can have as the backbone of our fact that it is an unchanging thing that stretches back millennia, that they look a little bit.
Our faith in Jesus is, and that doesn't change. And that's what we ought to be getting across. And there are demonstrable differences, specific ones, between growing up now versus growing up, coming to adulthood. Some demonstrable and difficult to manage distinctions that people now are dealing with that I didn't deal with. And I can't speak for you because you're younger than me, but
No, that's true. But that's what they happen when they reach middle age and they have kids. The same thing's going to happen. Those kids are going to face things they never had to face. That's all I'm saying. That always is.
So how do we then help them to navigate that when we don't have all the answers?
Right. Yeah, but that's why we can't carefully craft an image to address a certain set of problems and look a certain way, because the next generation comes along and that's not going to work. And
crafting an image is not what we're talking about. If I didn't make it clear, I don't think the analogy with Oldsmobile holds up, because that's not what we're doing. We're not trying to craft a brand. We're trying to be a community of faith for people struggling with real issues in our world. And how do we do that? How do we manage that? How do we help them to get to that place in their lives? And according to the data that we're looking at, we maybe aren't doing a real good job. All right, we got to go. Thank you very much for your comments. I don't want to keep you too much longer. Next week, we will pick up here, talk about some more specifics. And again, welcome your comments and your thoughts. Spend the week coming up with some things you want to say, and we will love to hear from you. Because I think we all have some specific experiences with this, with young adults. I think we all have specific experiences with these things. And I think it'll be really helpful for us to share those experiences.
Thank you.